Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Ridge Vineyards Spring 2018 virtual tasting. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is David Amadia, and I'm going to moderate today's tasting. We're coming to you live this morning from our Monte Bello estate. We're sitting right outside our hospitality center, the old Torrey Winery, at about 2,300 feet elevation. Off to my right is Silicon Valley, and about 20 miles in front of me, off to the south and west, is the Pacific Ocean. We'll be tasting 6 wines today. Our spring releases, 5 wines today. In tasting order, they are the 16 Estate Chardonnay, 16 Paso Robles Zinfandel, 16 Estate East Bench Zinfandel, 16 Geyserville, and the 2015 Estate Cabernet. So our regional managers are scattered about the U.S. right now. Tom Diazzo is with you in New York City with Wildman. Christina Donnelly is down in Southern California with the Estates Group, our 2017 Distributor of the Year. Congratulations to you, and thank you for your hard work last year. Katie DeNovo, our brand new Regional Sales Manager, be nice to her please, is in Missouri with D&E. And Mike Torino took a 5-minute drive, and he's with a group in Palm Beach today. So thank you all for joining us around the U.S. All these wines are very youthful. They're young. Need a little bit of air to show their best. So hopefully these wines were poured out or decanted a while ago, like we've done here. And certainly it's always a recommendation as you bring these wines out to share with your customers to make sure you open them ahead of time and do some decanting so they do show their best. Also, hopefully you've been able to print out the tasting mat and have the 5 wines poured out in front of you. This is a very interactive event. What makes it special is our ability to interact with you and the audience, your ability to ask questions of our winemaking and production team. We encourage you to submit your questions and comments to our team. You can either use the chat function on YouTube live streaming or simply shoot us an email at wholesale@ridgewine.com, wholesale@ridgewine.com. Either way, those questions will get in front of me and I'll pass those along to our panel. We're also encouraging you to share your experiences today's tasting through social media. The hashtag is Ridge Virtual, all one word, Ridge Virtual. Please share photos, videos, thoughts about today's tastings through Instagram or your favorite social media platform. Joining us today are 3 key members of our production team, and let's take a moment to introduce them to you. Starting off immediately to my left is John Olney. John is our COO at Lytton Springs, joined Ridge in 1996. So quick math, that's 22 years here at Ridge Vineyards, and we appreciate John joining us today. In the middle of the panel there is Eric Baugher. Eric is the CEO here at the Monte Bello estate, joining Ridge in 1994. He is in, that sounds like 24 years here at Ridge.
Correct.
And then the senior member at the far end down there is David Gates. He's our Senior VP of Vineyard Operations, joining Ridge in 1989. I can't even do the math on that. I know it's a long time though. I'd like to thank John, Eric, and David for being with us this morning. So we usually start off with a couple of topics before we dive into the wines. I think we wanted to talk a little bit about the fires. Last time we joined you was in September of 2017, roughly a month before the actual fires. So we haven't actually had an opportunity to address that. So I just wanted to throw it open to the panel to talk about what impact, if any, that the fires had on Ridge. And maybe I'll ask David Gates on the vineyard side to talk about that and kick us off from a vineyard perspective.
Yeah, well, the good news and all of the bad situation of the fire in the North Bay was that none of our people lost their homes. None of our vineyards, or estate or grower vineyards burned. Some were threatened, especially the Pagani Ranch, but nothing burned. So for that, we're very thankful. The fire started on a Sunday night. on the prior Saturday, so a day and a half or so before that Calistoga fire first started, we finished picking at Pagani Ranch. So that was the last pick for us in Sonoma County. That was the good part of it all.
Right.
The bad part was all the 4,500 homes burned and the loss of life. They're starting to rebuild now. It looks very different, especially with green on the hills in the north coast. Here at Monte Bello, that Monday morning, that it smelled like there was a fire right outside the door. The smoke had gotten down here quickly. We were picking that day, and we ended up stopping just because the smoke it smelled very badly. It was still clear, but smelled of smoke. We waited a few days. The wind shifted and blew the smoke into the city, then blew the smoke toward Sacramento and whatnot. So we ended up delaying our pick for a little bit, and then the Bear Creek fire started up, which was a little.
Yeah, we were just getting ready to start up again, and
so
boom, another fire in the canyon right across from us.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that we didn't really smell any of that smoke. That was mostly directed away from us, thank goodness. But we did wait a little bit and then continued along the way. Luckily, the weather held, and we got all of the fruit in at Monte Bello. So
great.
Yeah, we were lucky.
We were really fortunate up in Sonoma. There was what most people were seeing on the TV was the Tubbs fire down by Santa Rosa, and there was another one above Geyserville, and and we were just sandwiched right in the middle. So we didn't lose anything in terms of the winery, or like David said, in the vineyards. The grapes were all in, and the 17s overall, the quantities are down, but they're very concentrated wines, and the quality is excellent. So I know there's a lot of questions out there about, understandably about what's the effect on the wines. But the wines are fine.
Effect. I mean, they're beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just
So it's
fortunate that the air quality is really what slowed us down a bit here with the Cabernet.
In terms of the picking.
We were already well into the Monte Bello harvest, and most was off the vine.
Right.
So it was just a few more days worth of picking to do once we had finally clear weather or clear air.
Well, certainly in Sonoma, a side benefit of picking earlier than most people certainly benefited us in 2017.
We were caught in this,
Right. Didn't have fruit still out on the vine, so.
Well, and it was, after that Labor Day heat wave, I mean, if you still had fruit on the vine, you're only going to be making dessert wine out of it.
Right.
I mean, it was that hot, so luckily we were really well into the Zinfandel harvest before that weekend.
Right,
really. The temperatures went up to about 115.
Right, and the Pagani, which was the last picking for us in Sonoma County, is always our last picking at a very cool site.
Cool site.
Right, and we fortunately just got that in a day and a half before the actual fire. So just lucky more than anything from a winemaking and vineyard perspective. And none of the vineyards have been damaged by fire subsequently or anything like that.
That's correct.
Okay,
we're very, very lucky.
So a second topic we just wanted to touch on before we dove into the wines was, last winter we had basically double normal rainfall, really sort of put an end to the drought. But this winter we're sort of back into it, David, right?
Yeah, it's one of those the yo-yo effect, I guess, of climate change. January and February. We started out really nicely, actually.
November was good rain.
November, December, but then January and February, it was 70, almost 80 degrees. We set records of temperature records anyway. Very little rain.
Yeah, there was like nothing in January.
A little bit. So it didn't quite beat 2015 January. There was zero.
It's hard to beat zero.
So we beat that by about a tenth of an inch. No, I don't know, not very much. And then March became January again. So March, very cold, very wet, and we actually almost caught up. So we're over 22 inches, normally 36 or so inches at Lytton Springs. Geyserville is a little less than that always, because this kind of sits in the plains there on Russian River. Here at Monte Bello, we're almost to 20 inches, so, and we're usually 30, 32, or 35. So I would say this is a drought. These late spring rains are nice because they're immediately available to the vines, as long as the weeds don't drink it all up. Yeah, but that's good, and we've seen that in for the 3 of the drought years we had some nice late rains that really helped, and I expect that to continue this year. I mean, the vines will be okay. Long term, it's not good for groundwater recharge, and the vines are just kind of coming out of the 4-year drought, and I worry about them, getting hammered again, especially that hot, dry January and February. It's not normal, and they don't like not normal.
February is normally our biggest rainfall month, and we just haven't seen that over the last few years at all. It's been a dry February.
We had the deluge.
Yeah. Right. And Eric, you want to just talk about a little bit some of the things we're doing to mitigate this lack of rainfall?
I mean, in the winery, it's all about water conservation as much as we can, really watching the water use. And then just having been through so many droughts, we've realized that it was important to put in a system to reclaim all the water that's used in the winery. So all the barrel washing, tank washing, all that water can be captured and cleaned up and basically held for vineyard irrigation on the young vines around the winery, or put back to the aquifer. The other system we put in is really a way to funnel all the hard surface runoff water from the roofs and the driveways and channel that back down to the aquifer. So we installed a system of reverse wells that can capture all those rain events, and instead of having it just run off the property, we can actually hold on to it, feed the aquifer for the future use.
How deep are those reverse wells?
They go down about, I think, it goes all the way through the limestone, anywhere between 50 and 90 feet.
Okay. And that gets it back into the aquifer.
Getting it down into the aquifer, the fractured limestone.
Okay.
And from there, then our wells can make use and pull the water up and out at a later time.
All right. Well, thanks for all that good information. We all appreciate that. So why don't we start with the first wine, the 16 Estate Chardonnay that was made here at Monte Bello, sourced here at Monte Bello, Eric. So why don't you kick us off?
Well, this comes from the 5th year of drought, the final year, which gave us better rainfall than 14 and 15. The vines had a little bit more water resources to pull from. The vines were really feeling the effect of the drought. They weren't as productive in yield. So the yields really from 15, 16, and including even 17 vintage, the yields have been really on the short side. So we didn't make much of this wine, but we got really excellent concentration in the grapes. I mean, the summer was warm, dry, hot at times, but then also offset by some really cold days. So we had the fog coming off the Pacific and the bay. And that really helped with just this gradual ripening we were able to get in the grapes, to pick by taste, bring the fruit in, make this amazing Chardonnay with a lot of intensity, and really still have held on to acidity and kept the alcohol within a reasonable range.
Yeah.
So more moderate style of ripeness.
Yeah, I love this wine.
Yeah, all fermented nicely in barrel. The cellar's below ground. We use a mix of mostly American, but just a little bit of French in there. Kind of a carryover from the time when we were using only French oak. There was a couple of those French barrels that I really like, so I still bring in about 8 to 10% of those barrels every year, but then combine it with the really beautiful American oak barrels that we've found to work with. And we ferment out over about 5 years of different aged barrels, all native yeast. And the amazing thing with Chardonnay is that you can fill these barrels with this juice. We put a mixer on it, so we're homogenizing it. We barrel it down, and the yeast in one barrel might be a slightly different mix than the barrel right next to it. And so as it's slowly transforming into wine, you can taste all these different barrels, and while it was all the same juice at the start, it could easily go off on many different paths of flavor, texture. So when it comes down to the actual assemblage of this wine, it's not just this simple, it's this parcel and that parcel combined. It's a really wild mix of all these different barrels more than just a single piece of ground.
That's really interesting because we've always talked about this wine, not about a vineyard selection, but a barrel selection.
It really does.
And is
come
that
down
why
to that.
that's why we describe
And
it this way?
there are certain parcels that will always make a certain style of Chardonnay. The acidity might be slightly different in it, but still within all of that and all these different parcels we work with, there are going to be these barrels that really come together nicely to make a nice, elegant Chardonnay with really good fruit intensity, lots of complexity.
Yeah.
And then when we're looking through and we're tasting, we find those barrels that really show the limestone character really well and have even higher acid. Those are what we'll reserve as the Monte Bello bottling.
Well, I'm tasting a lot of minerality in this one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
and a lot of salinity, it's just like
yeah,
really
and I think
really
the salinity
beautiful.
really is what is brought up from the ocean, with the fog, because these vines do grow down right at that fog line, so they will get the benefit of that coolness at night and the fog, which will then burn off by 9 in the morning, and then get the nice morning sun from the north and kind of northeast exposure that they have.
So the question to you, David, is when are we going to get more Chardonnay?
Well, as being a farmer, I'm always cautiously optimistic. So
It's going to be 18, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, the little shoots on our Chardonnay, they actually started to push at the beginning, the first week or two in February, and then they sat there all March getting beat up by the wind and rain. And now they're legging out. They're about 4 to 6 inches, and you can see the little cluster primordia forming, and it looks good. There are 2 clusters on a shoot, so that we haven't seen that for a few years. So we
But
just make sure.
Also, we've lost 1 block to Pierce's disease.
Yes.
And 2,000 vines.
Over
at
6 acres.
Yeah. So we've got, lower, well, we might get better yields, but less vines producing,
Okay.
Yeah.
But cautiously optimistic. We are going to look at possibly a little more Chardonnay planting as we develop more acreage on the open space. So, but that's in the future, not the near. Well, I'd say near future, but that's farming terms.
In farming terms, near future. In real life terms, that could be a ways away.
A long time, yeah, exactly. But in wine terms,
more Chardonnay. I mean, at the peak of when all the vines were producing a good, reasonable yield, we were easily over 3,500 cases worth. But last 3 years now, it's been less than 2,500.
And that's been a combination of the drought and then difficult springs, right?
Yeah, rain during bloom has
Yeah.
really had an impact the last couple of years.
And what about the rain we've had this year in March? Is that going to affect Chardonnay production again?
It shouldn't. Typically, the rains. So Chardonnay will get affected in the season that it's growing by weather events in kind of 3 different ways. One is really cold, wet weather like we saw in March.
Yeah.
But it was too cold, which is really good, and so it didn't allow botrytis. You can get botrytis shoot blight, which can destroy shoots and whatnot. So we escaped that.
Okay.
The next weather events that we have to watch is when it's actually in bloom. And then, and if weather
more like May,
yeah,
late
should be
May.
Yes, should be May. And if weather's good, then it'll set. The set will be good, and then we'll get what we get. Then the third weather events, of course, is near harvest when the grapes have softened up. So we in California is blessed in that we really don't get rain very often, knock on wood, at harvest. So that's what we always hope for. Anyway.
I don't know, is it tougher being a farmer or a consumer of Chardonnay from Ridge? I don't know, just a tougher job. I don't know. Okay, well, why don't we move on to the second wine, which is the Paso Zinfandel, and David, why don't you kick us off on that wine?
Sure. Ridge has been making Paso Robles from Benito Ducey's vineyards every year since 1976. Although the first year was actually a Dave Bennion, a pre-Paul Draper wine, 1967, from when Benny Ducey was still making a little bit of wine and selling it in jugs. He quickly soured on that, and by 76 decided to come back to Ridge, and we're buying almost all of his fruit. He still sells to a few home winemakers. Some of them are kids and grandkids of the original home winemakers that he was selling to in the 70s. And he's a sweetheart of a guy, his nephew, Mike Ducey, who farms over 1,000 acres in Paso. He is helping Benny out, because Benny's getting old. He's 86, I think. And still drives the tractor. Yeah, I know. Still drives the tractor, but his knee's giving him issues. But so the wine, this I should talk about the wine instead of Benny. Yeah,
Our wine's pretty opulent.
Yeah.
Nice warm regions in.
It's Paso Robles, so it doesn't have a lot of tannin. It has a lot of aromatics. What I really love about the last few vintages, and that's thanks, I think, to the drought of Paso, is that the acidity has been really bright and really picks the wine up. So for me, this is like a perfect.
Unusually acidic the last couple of years.
Yeah, we
I mean,
actually
we've been
have a
picking
question
early.
on that. Yeah, it said the Paso is so elegant this year. Can you speak to why that is?
Yeah.
Oh, submerged cap fermentation.
Okay.
Because it's the first grapes to come into the winery, so it's like we've got all the tanks available, and with Zen we like to do the submerged cap, which is keeping the skins under the juice to ferment, which you just get nice, gentle, continuous 24-hour-a-day extraction out of the skins. It just leads to a much nicer, supple palate, rounder tannins.
Do our other Zinfandels get that treatment as well?
Yeah, I mean, as we get more into the Zinfandel vintage, those tanks get used a lot, and we'll generally dedicate, anytime they're available to fill, we'll put Geyserville fruit into those tanks to really help.
Paso is it gets almost all of it.
Yeah, 100% of
Yeah.
it in this case, because all the tanks were available.
And it's a wine that you don't really worry about over extraction with
No,
either.
generally never. I mean,
Yeah.
although it's 17 that I've been tasting lately out of barrel up at the winery, it's pretty powerful. It's got the tannins.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Concentrated grapes.
They were concentrated, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good. And this, I mean, Benny's been farming this, if I remember, since the 1940s. I mean, he really took over in the early mid 40s. And
When his brother Dante went to the service, Benny took over the farming, and then he had a stint in Korea, did his time, and then wasn't farming then, but he's been doing it ever since. And I think it was 14 or something when he kind of took it over.
And these are some of the oldest grapes in Paso, planted in the 20s, right?
The oldest vine, the surviving vines of the 22 or so acres at Benny's, about 4 or 5 are still survive from that. They're own rooted, planted in the 20s, so they've died slowly from phylloxera.
Right.
And as they die, he replaces them with rootstock, starting about 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Yeah.
So those are
it's
now
just-
old vines.
Yeah, so it just kind of slowly creeps along. His late brother Dante, who Mike Ducey, his nephew, farms that now. He has a small amount of vines that are that old. And then there are I think 4 vineyards total in Paso that are over 50 years old.
So another question we have is the differences vintage-wise on the Zinfandels between the 15s and the 16s. Can you speak to some of the differences you saw in terms of the growing season and impact on the styles of the wine?
Well, both were dry years for sure. I guess 16 just was a little bit hotter summer. 15 was more of a mild growing season, but it was also like 40% down on tonnage. So then the grapes got really perfectly concentrated.
Yeah, where 16 was a little more of a normal
Yeah,
crop,
more normal
so
crop, so a little bit more filled out clusters. And
I think you get a little more elegance in the 16s and the 15s, a little more structure.
Because of the smaller crop.
yeah.
They were both early harvests. 15 was early, even though it was a cool growing season. It budded really early because of the drought, and that was a very dry winter. And so it kind of went through its normal thing, and by the middle of August, it was ready to go. 16, it was ready to go in the middle of August because it was so hot.
Yeah.
Okay, so a little warmer in 16, bigger crop,
Yeah.
and maybe more elegant wines. 15, smaller crop, more concentrated, denser vintage.
The ageable vintage will be the 15.
15s.
For sure.
Okay, well, good. So why don't we move to another 16s Zinfandel, the Eastman's. And John, this is a wine you make at Lytton Springs. Why don't we talk a bit about that wine?
Sure. So, it's actually really a coincidence, but it's great to have the Paso and the East Bench right next to each other. These are some of the only wines we actually make, which are 100% Zinfandel. So you have 2 wines with the exact same varietal, and really the only difference is, Paso, of course, comes from down in Paso Robles, and the East Bench comes from Dry Creek. I'd say the other difference, of course, is that the East Bench, this is a vineyard which we planted in 2000, so that's 18 years, so much younger vines than what you have in Paso. And I think, sort of following on that theme about the sort of suppleness of the Paso, with the East Bench you get a little bit more structure there. There's a little bit more tannin through the mid palate, but still that great expression of fruit. I think it's just for me it really is. I think it really exemplifies what Dry Creek Zinfandel is all about. And certainly in 16, like Derek said, it was a little hotter. And with these kind of wines, when they're 100% Zinfandel, one of our biggest challenges is just getting them picked at the right time. Because we're not going for that, sort of super ripe style. And I think we did. I think we hit them pretty good for the 16s.
Usually one of your first vineyards to pick, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me the fruit is different here too. For me, the fruit's a little blacker from East Bench and a little maybe redder from Paso.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
Well, you get more moderate, or probably cooler nights in Dry Creek Valley than Paso. Paso's hot during the day, warm at night, so grape just ripens very differently.
Yeah.
It's going to hold on to more of that cherry fruit quality. The cool nights is going to allow the grapes to respire at Dry Creek and really make more of those darker berry qualities.
And now we planted the East Bench in 1999, 2000, and we have we're doing some changes at that vineyard now. Is that right? In terms of some replantings
Some
and
rootstock,
extensions.
Right? So we're going to add a little bit. We're adding another acre, which doesn't sound like a lot, but every little bit helps, right? And we're also extending a few rows so that the owners who we are leasing from the Funstons had a little extra land that we wanted to plant earlier, and now they've said yes, so we're doing that.
Great.
Yeah.
But still just planting Zin, right? I mean, you're not going to do any mixed black and...
Nope, just Zin.
Still pure Zinfandel.
Yeah.
And do you want to talk a little bit, David, how it was originally planted and how we made the decisions how to plant that vineyard? I mean, we don't get to plant Zinfandel vineyards from scratch too often, but talk about the thinking that went behind the planting of East Bench.
Yeah, the neat part about East Bench, the Funston vineyard, is that it's all one soil type. It's this beautiful red clay loam that's fairly old soil, and this particular site had vineyards on it before Prohibition, but sometime after Prohibition those vineyards were pulled out, and it had cattle and horses and whatnot, animals on it instead of farming, instead of agriculture, or I should say row crops or grapes or whatever, for 60, 80 years, something like that, until we planted it in 2000, 2001. So we ended up having a clean slate, and you get a sense of what the pioneers thought of, or faced when they were opening up land and planting it for the first time to grapes, because there was the vines just were screaming out of the ground, and big crops. We were dropping a little bit like the Witten Ranch on the young vines, where we would drop half the crop and still have to drop more because it was just too much. So very prolific, growing very well. If I could do it again, it's planted our traditional 6 feet between vines, 8 feet between rows. I would have do it again. I'd go to 9 or 10 feet between rows, just because they grow so
Yeah, it's
well.
like a jungle.
It
You
is.
walk through there during those seasons.
And we're committed to
the row safely.
Yeah.
yes, and we're committed to head training it. So you need that extra space when they're vigorous vines, big vines.
But they're slowing down now. I mean,
They are.
they've
They're-
got time, and they've
Yeah.
been slowly depleting the soil.
Exactly. They're getting
that's
into
what
their
now, I
they're
mean,
getting
you
into
need
their
this
maturity. Yeah.
Beautiful intensity now.
Yeah, they really are turning a corner, I think, in terms of, like David said, getting sort of a darker fruit, a little more serious wine if you want.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's not a wine that really needs the mixed blacks to help it with structure and color. I mean,
Yeah.
the Zin does so well there.
It's amazing.
It's a great site.
And the cool thing is that it's not just a single Zin selection. It's we've got some of these, our favorite old heritage selections growing there. So it's got some unique diversity of flavors.
Absolutely. It's not a monoculture that way. So circling back, this is kind of the way it works. We get done with the wine, and then the questions come in about the wine. So this is a sort of a clarification question about the Paso, Eric, about why are we able to use submerged cap on Paso for the entire wine? Just understanding sort of the technicality.
So many tanks that have that set up in the winery. So because there's no other Zinfandel vineyards being picked at the same time, and Paso being the first, it just comes right in and goes right to those tanks.
And can you describe the actual mechanism? The mechanism to submerge?
Well, in the old days here at Ridge, they had the wood tanks and the heading boards they'd lower down and nail in. I mean, pretty, that's the theory. The theory of it is, it's keeping the skins down and the cap wet, and you get good extraction. Paul designed a system with stainless steel with perforations and a much cleaner sanitary way of holding the skins down below the juice.
Okay, so this is an old school Ridge method, though.
Yeah, oh, it is, and it actually goes all the way back to Bordeaux, just an extraction method.
So is there any truth to that? It was originally invented because the founders here at Ridge had day jobs. They weren't here during the week. They couldn't pump it over, so they figured out a way to keep the cap.
You have to keep the cap wet,
right?
So you do have to keep it down below, and if you can't pump it over every day, then you have to have some way to keep it.
Necessity is the mother of invention, isn't it? Yes. Okay. All right.
Well, and it just gives you that really positive, gentle extraction. So really nice, polished, round tannins.
And David, another question on Paso. What would you say the average age of the vines are at the Ducey Ranch?
Oh gosh, pick a number.
How about the oldest and the youngest?
The oldest were planted in 1924, so they're approaching, they're 90 plus years old.
Right.
The youngest, I think the last time Benny did some replanting was 2 years ago, so those vines aren't producing yet. And that was maybe 100 vines, something like that. He usually does 100 or 200 vines every couple years as the old vine. It's just that the phylloxera in that vineyard doesn't spread very quickly, so and it's actually...
Well, it's because it's tough soil. I mean, it's all alluvial, riverbed, kind of like a river stone.
And it's living. It has killed the vines where there's enough clay and whatnot, which phylloxera likes. So the vines that are surviving are actually in very much in gravel, and so it's moving very slowly. Okay. At the height, he was probably doing 300 vines a year, but that was 15 or 20 years ago. So I'd say. Exactly.
Okay.
So pick a number. I don't know.
Okay. Before I move to the next one, just this is my bad. I forgot to call out Canada. I know Dan Buckler's up in I think he's in Alberta today. Up in maybe Edmonton, I'm guessing. I know he's somewhere up north. So to all of our Canadian brokers across Canada, thank you for joining us today. And David, the next wine is Geyserville 16. You want to start us off on that?
Sure, the 2016 Geyserville. So as most people probably know, the heart of this wine is the Old Patch and the Old Carignan at Geyserville, planted in the 1890s. It's a completely randomly sort of mixed vineyard consisting of Carignan and Zinfandel and Teinturier varieties, Syrah, Mataro, quite a bit of Mataro, Grenache, some beautiful Grenache vines, and then a whole hodgepodge of other varieties, including an old Mission hybrid, which is common used to be common in the state. 3 old Bordelais varieties that are almost extinct now: Becklin, Saint Macaire, and Mortau or Manson. So yeah, cool things. Some Counoise, which was Black Malvoisie, that was the name of it back in the day. What else? Did I mention Petit Boucher? Petit Boucher, Petit Syrah, Pelersan, Grand Noir. I could keep going, and a couple of table grapes. So, but that's how they planted vineyards back basically before Prohibition. You see the same thing at Lytton East. That's the heart of our Lytton Springs wine. That is, those grapes really do form the backbone. They always have this great intensity, and the Carignan lifts the nose very much on Geyserville. It also is growing in one soil type, the Pleasanton gravelly loam, which kind of helps with the consistency of it. Unlike Lytton Springs, which has 5 different soil types. So there's a lot more to pick and choose from. Geyserville, you see it right away. You know, that's just where it's grown. And the young Zin, which is now almost 20 years old. No, almost 30 years old. Jeez, is contributes really nicely. And then our new patch, which was planted also in 2000, it has been a consistent contributor to the intensity of the wine. So.
You wanted to find new patch for our audience?
Yeah, that was a 6-acre block that we were fortunate to acquire on a lease that we planted in 2000, and we kind of sort of mimicked the old patch, although not all the way. We went 50%
ancient
Zin.
Bordeaux grapes in there.
Yeah, no, we don't. No, but we went 50% Zin, 20% Petit Syrah, 20% Carignan, and then 10% a smorgasbord of different varieties.
Which is fun to walk through, tasting during harvest, all the different grapes at the different levels of ripeness. Zin is always ready to pick, but then you've got to really compensate for the fact that some of the other varieties aren't quite there. So the total mix, you've got to try to get a good idea of the ripeness of the block. Pick too early, it's going to be underripe. Pick too late, it's going to be way overripe. So kind of have to find that middle ground.
John, I mean, with Lytton, you're working with a mixed black vineyard there as well. What is your experience of co-fermenting all these varieties together versus separating them out and fermenting them separately?
Well, yeah, we've done some trials and have really greatly preferred the the co-fermentation. I mean, I think the magic of these kind of mixed vineyards is that there's over 10,000 grape varieties out in the world that you can make wine from, and to think that 100 years ago that they were actually choosing these grapes, I think there was definitely some trial and error. So. And really the kind of the trifecta of a mixed vineyard is Zinfandel, which brings all that fruit and ripeness, the Petit Syrah, which gives you the color, the tannin, and then the Carignan, which helps sort of the counter effect to the higher sugar in the Zin. You have lower sugar in Carignan and a lot of acid. And when you do those, when you put those together, they really integrate. Whereas when you do them separately, and then you try to start fiddling around with them, maybe the Zinfandel has already lost some color, whereas it holds onto that color when it combines in the fermenter with the Petit Syrah. So I mean, it's no question.
Like alchemy. I mean, you got this real fusion of molecules that each grape brings to the mix, and then it's all cooking together, fermenting, and it's
making a stew, really.
It really is. You definitely get a better integration when they're co-fermenting than trying to back blend later on as finished separate variety.
You have this challenge of trying to pick at exactly the right time with all these varieties ripening at different rates. And then you have Zinfandel, which is not an even ripener to begin with also.
Oh, I know.
And then if you hit it right though, if you pick at the right time, you get this combination of overripe, underripe, perfectly ripe all together, fermenting together, right?
Yeah, but I mean, dialing in just exactly what those varietals are going to be is it's pretty incredible actually that they did it. I mean, you can't. I don't think you can be Johnny Appleseed and just throw out random varietals. I think there has to be a method to the madness.
There's got to be good synergy between the varieties working together, so complementing. So that's why you don't find Cabernet in the mix. You don't find Pinot Noir, except for one vine. I mean, you generally are finding varieties that tend to play well together.
Really to complement Zinfandel. That's what they were trying to do, wasn't it? I mean, that was the core, and then they were looking for these things, these wines, these grapes to complement, right?
Yeah.
And I know that they experimented with Syrah, and Syrah was too dominant, right? It really kind of masked the fruit of the Zinfandel, right?
There's also a growing reason why they didn't always put a lot of Syrah in. Without wire, Syrah is it's a big grower. It's vigorous, but it's not as strong as, say, it's as vigorous as Cabernet, but it's not, the shoots aren't as strong as Cabernet. So you end up with a lot of broken arms and a lot of vines that you can tell the Syrah vines at the old patch because they're kind of sprawled out on the ground with their arms twisted all over. That's Syrah if you don't grow it on wire.
So you went right to the viticultural reason for not growing it,
Yeah.
which is interesting.
Anytime I've ever done the Zin Syrah blend, you just add 5% or so, and it really starts to take away from the pleasure of the Zinfandel.
Yeah.
It becomes darker and more gamey and
Yes,
wild tasting.
Syrah is a very dominant grape varietal, so
Cabernet.
right. So they tend to fight when they're put together.
Yeah,
I sort of liken it to
together,
it's sort of like the Southern Rhone, where you have Grenache. Sort of Grenache is to Zinfandel, and you take Chateauneuf, where they bring in all these Mourvedre and all these other different grapes. I think it's a very similar.
To complement the Grenache.
Complement the Grenache.
Yeah, which is the core.
And if you look at the oldest vineyards in Chateauneuf du Pape, they're interplanted, many of them. Yeah.
David, we have a question about how we do our replantings as vines die at Geyserville and Lytton.
So we get a little mini excavator, which is basically a backhoe that fits down those 8-foot rows, and we dig out the dead vine, and we do this every few years as we need to. And then we add a bunch of compost, and then we put a rootstock in, just a rootstock vine, which is resistant to phylloxera and other diseases, other pests in the soil. We let that grow for a year or 2 or 3, whatever it takes, and then we bud whatever variety we want on it.
And do we try to replace what was there, or we don't necessarily do that?
We do both. So sometimes we don't know what was there.
Okay.
And other times, if we're following a pattern like that cool grid pattern of Teinturier varieties at Lytton East in the flats, we will follow that pattern.
Yeah.
And try to keep it true to the overall percentage of the block.
But if it is a Beckland that died, we're probably not going to replace it with another Beckland.
No, we have that now.
Now we do.
Those vines actually went through the clean stock program through the Foundation Plant Services at the University of California, so they're available to anyone and everyone.
So we can plant it up here then.
Yeah, we could.
Yeah.
It might be a little too cool, but yeah. Yes, we can.
So why don't we move to the final wine, Eric, which is the 15 Estate Cab, and maybe you want to also comment on the lack of Estate Merlot for this vintage.
Yeah, well, Merlot did feel the effect during bloom again with the weather, the spring storms, because it blooms generally right about the same time the Chardonnay does, and so it got affected. The yields in 15 of Merlot were down really low, but then the quality was so good. So when we did all our assemblage tastings, we put quite a bit into the Monte Bello of the very best blocks, and then the softer, more fruit-forward lots then rolled right into the Estate Cab. Didn't leave us anything left to do a separate varietal bottling. In fact, we weren't even able to do any of the smaller historic vineyard series bottlings because the overall yields across the Monte Bello vineyard were way down. Okay. So this is a small production. Half of what the 14 was, but it's a really substantial wine. I mean, it was a perfect growing season. We had just the right amount of heat late in the season, right in the days of harvest to really kick up that really dark berry fruit. And then really good tannin extraction. I mean, it was not a tannic year, so, just I think extracted perfectly to, in this wine here, it's all about early drinkability. So we were able to really make almost the perfect Estate Cab. Really supple tannins.
Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about the philosophy behind this wine? It's not really a traditional second wine. It really is a wine unto itself, really, isn't it?
And that has a lot to do with just this terrain that we're growing on. We have 45 different blocks of the Bordeaux grapes growing between 1,300 foot and 2,700 feet elevation on all these different slopes and exposures. Some areas the soils are eroded. The vines are really influenced greatly by the limestone. You see it in the wine, that really strong limestone character, and those are generally the blocks that will make Monte Bello. Where the eroded soils have accumulated further down the mountain, where it's a little bit richer soil, maybe even better water resources from the springs that run through the mountain, those vines will produce, a juicier wine with softer tannins, and so those blocks are generally reserved for the Estate Cab.
Right. So having made wine at this vineyard for more than 50 years, we have we have a pretty good idea how the different blocks perform today, which allows us to do this, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we really began making this shift in winemaking and identifying those blocks around 2002 to really be able to tailor the winemaking for the two different wines, knowing what block is coming into the winery. You know, is it a block that makes Monte Bello? If it is, you know, we taste in the fermenter and really carefully guide it along in extraction to make sure it's got the ageable tannins. And then the estate lots, we back off on pump overs a bit. We slow down the extraction and really try to keep it soft and, you know, drinkable so that it can actually make a cab you can enjoy in its youth.
It's all about balancing the
balancing the
winemaking
extraction
to the block, balancing the wines.
Right.
Yeah, and also, you know, recognizing the vintage difference too. So you've got your highly tannic years and lower tannin years, and so you have to quickly adapt.
Yeah, so I mean, the Monte Bello and the Estate Cabernet, they're both wines of place. They both represent the vineyard where they come from, but we're talking about winemaking adjustments to really get the most out of each block, right?
That's true, yeah.
Yeah.
And to be able to make these two different styles that come from this piece of ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have the Monte Bello that is best when it's had 10 to 15 years of bottle age, whereas this fills in that spot to drink young. You can enjoy this now.
Right.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, it allows us to have this wine available that people can enjoy now while they're waiting for their Monte Bello to age in the cellar. It allows us to have a wine available in restaurants that restaurants can serve, you know, more immediately. They don't have to cellar themselves. And it gives consumers an opportunity to taste the terroir of Monte Bello at really a fraction of the price of our top wine. So it's really it's an amazing wine, and I mean, we've done a lot of tastings of this wine versus other top Cabernets in this price range from around California, primarily Napa, but also from Sonoma. And it really does stand out in the crowd, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a wine that really has finesse, a lot of complexity. It's just got the perfectly polished tannins. It's not overdone, overripe. I mean, it's really made in a style that goes well with food. And, you know, it's a highly enjoyable wine.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out the climate too, which, you know, speaking of, you know, not being a super ripe style.
Vineyard and next to the ocean.
It's
cold.
Exactly. It's
or
really
it can
cold
be
up
cold,
there.
but it's, you know, it can also get pretty hot, but never as hot as Napa. I mean, the hottest day here is still going to be 10 to 15 degrees cooler than Napa.
Right, so we're getting ripeness at what is this 12.5%, 13% as opposed to, you know, the 14 to and up.
Tremendously different style. David, we have a question about Pierce's disease, and here at Monte Bello, are we impacted, and, you know, what type of measures are we taking to combat Pierce's disease here?
So yes, we are impacted. It's mostly in our lower elevation vineyards where there's, I guess, just a little wetter, or the insect doesn't like the cold winters that we have further up the hill. In the Santa Cruz Mountains, any mountainous region where you have small vineyard blocks, Pierce's disease can be a significant threat because it's kind of an edge disease. It's vectored by, in Northern California, vectored by blue-green sharpshooters that don't fly very far, so they kind of chew in at the edges, and they actually are have little stylets where they feed on sap on the leaves and sometimes the stems, and that's in those stylets is where this bacterium that causes Pierce's disease is called Xylella fastidiosa, where it lives. And it also lives in surrounding brush. There's certain hosts for it. The best host for it seems to be European grapevine, so Vitis vinifera. It actually originated, this bacterium grew up, co-evolved with eastern grapes. So all the Vitis species from the east are pretty much immune to it, because it doesn't do a disease or a disease-causing organism. If it kills its host too quickly, it doesn't do it any good, right? It's not, and so that's what happens when you have a foreign, when you have a foreign variety or grape variety come in, and then you have a disease that is normally okay on other varieties, takes it out. Interestingly, Vitis californicus, which is California's native grape, is also very much susceptible to Pierce's disease because it didn't co-evolve. The insect, until people brought it over, and the disease never made it over the Rockies like so many other diseases and pests, which is why California is so anal about trying to keep things out.
Yeah, have you ever driven it through the border
like
here?
Republican? No, I'm just teasing. Easter anyway. So, what do we do to combat it? Back in the early '90s, when we had another epidemic of Pierce disease, we would monitor in the vineyard for blue-green sharpshooters and then spray them with an insecticide to try to knock down their numbers. And now we, instead of using an insecticide, we use this kaolin clay called Surround. And so when we see the numbers of the insects start to build in our little sticky traps, we go through and spray that on the vines, and they don't like that on their little mouth part, their stylet, and so they don't feed on the vine, and that keeps them away. Also, when we do see a vine that is infected, we take it out as quick as we can.
Okay.
We're also working on a project with Otsuka Pharmaceuticals, which is a totally ridiculous new adventure for them, along with Texas A&M and UC Davis, looking at using phage, which are basically little antibacterial DNA units that go after they go after this Xylella fastidiosa, and trying to figure out a way to get that into the vine to actually kill off the bacteria so the vine can live.
So we're talking about inoculating individual vines.
Yeah.
Yes, and we'll see if that goes live.
I think we just lost about half our audience.
Yeah, sorry about that. But we're trying to do other things. So. Yeah, got nerdy in a hurry, huh?
Yeah, no, thank you for that though, David.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I find it really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, I think that's it. I apologize if we didn't get to your questions. We promised to answer them via email if we didn't answer them online here this morning. Thanks again for joining us. We appreciate your attendance. We appreciate your questions. We appreciate the love and care you take with Ridge out in the market for us. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the fall with the fall release virtual tasting. Have a good day.